Thanks very much for everyone coming to this impromptu reprise of my Game UX Summit talk, covering XR UX today and tomorrow. My name is Dylan Urquidi, senior engineer by title at Unity Labs. And luckily in Labs, we're allowed to express ourselves in different ways. In my case, my passions also lie in design, UX, research, art, multitude of other things. Being in Labs is a nice, unique position to be able to express that. Shout out to Timothy West and Greg Madison for all the critique, insight, constructive criticism, and guidance in assisting me in sort of shaping and helping me refine my design approaches and opening my eyes to new paradigms as well as their input on some of the concepts that we'll cover herein. So the talk is XR UX today and tomorrow, mostly tomorrow, obviously. Today, in my opinion, relies on a bunch of conventions that to a great degree are most useful in the near term, but are becoming obsolete to the tune of weeks and months after application. So I'll put a lot less emphasis on that. There are plenty of talks out there that will tell you that a certain convention is, because they sold 500 copies of their title, is definitely the way to go for the next 10 years. I'm not going to do that here. We're going to cover XR lifestyle, ontology, and taxonomy. This, I feel strongly, is one of the first aspects that we need to hit in being able to design a new ontology around what it is, the intersection in between what we deem as reality and what it is that will be mixed and merged into that case. We'll cover virtuality and the continuum and everything as well. Multi-context UX is extremely important. The content I'm going to cover will discuss the breakage of most of the frameworks and structure that designers rely on today. And that is, I own the context, I own the experience, I won't be interfered with, there won't be intrusion, that's gone in what I'm going to cover. Spatial UX is just one example of an experimental design pattern that we're working on in Labs that attempts to cover some ground that crosses between VR, AR, MR, assists with people with disabilities, and covers a few other things. It's ambitious and very young at this point, but it's one of the things we're going to cover here. AI and UX is going to make a lot of designers cry, I'm sorry, but we're going to hit that too. But it's a good thing because we get to become design DJs and curators to a degree. Ontological blending, I'm not hearing covered anywhere at this point, but any UX and UI approach, an input approach that's going to be needed for this MR future where we'll all live in this situation, it has to include ontological blending. We have to define ontologies for different situations. We have to define lenses for the ontologies that adapt to culture, gender, age, everything. And we need to be able to handle these context changes so that when you get on a plane and a certain gesture accomplishes a certain action, and then you get off that plane and that same gesture could cause offense to someone around you, we need to be able to understand as designers how we can handle this blending and handle this intuitive, automatic means of allowing an individual to express themselves in this domain. And my final point, the most important point, is a transparent experience. I've got to guess anyone interested in this field has probably seen the videos up on Vimeo, most importantly, which show the awesome AR, MR future where we have 1 million advertisements around here and everyone's social media ranking is above their head, et cetera, et cetera. You have no way to come back to reality from this point, and you'll have already more than likely ceded your ability to either have your aesthetic, your reality sculpted by someone with taste, with minimalism in mind, nature and reality in mind, if we can call this nature. You'll have ceded that ground, and that will be up to whomever it is that gets to make those choices. And I have a profound passion to have my whole life for this field, but I don't want to live in that reality. So this is a mild attempt at being able to at least make a small change in how we might get there. If I can encourage at least one designer, one researcher to be able to consider this, that, well, to a minor extent, might have changed the world to a degree. No biggie. XR UX today, we're going to cover going from web land and 2D land up to a design approach that takes into account and needs to take into account chains of actions and complex solving paths. We're going to be discussing how the path integral relates to design, how a multitude of paths can end up executing an event, and how eloquently it is that we can achieve that instead of having this linear set of steps and the same type of UI that we're used to seeing constantly. And again, ontological evolution. We've got to get rid of we've got to be willing to test every understanding of the current ontology surrounding UX and design and research. If we can't push those boundaries, we can't see what might be greater and more best fit for this situation coming up. So let's cover the basics real quick. Through this evolution, we need to hit the terminology. I'll hit this because this comes up in every single talk. What is XR? Almost no one ever knows when I speak, but it's getting a little better now. So XR is all the R's. Tony Parisi will have already hit this. The reality-virtuality continuum. So we're going from conscious human experience through AR, through MR, where you have intersection of this content with your perspective of what you believe reality is, all the way up to the point to where you're engrossed in VR, perhaps your senses are completely hijacked, and then you're living in there. Perhaps a futurist, transhuman style future. VR covers stuff that hopefully some people in here have heard of, at least probably the Gear VR with the saturation, but we have the Rift, the Vive, a bunch of lesser known headsets, I should say. Next is AR, MR, mixed hybrid, merged reality. The most popular thing I could mention here for most consumers is probably going to be the AR Kit and AR Core packages that were released, more than likely AR Kit at this point. Everyone's got a door and a portal popped up in front of them, and it's amazing. But that said, the next question I get every single time is, but it's all AR, right? No, it's not all AR. So AR is Tony Stark or Mecha. You've got content laid up in front of your vision. It's anchored to the glasses, to the display, and it doesn't have any interplay with the content around you. MR is what I think most people actually think of when they're saying AR. So that's content here sitting at the table that if it were back here or back here to you would be occluded by the laptop. So MR is actually what most people are talking about when they say AR nowadays. So that's again, the interplay of content, this virtual content in our day-to-day reality. Coming back to one of the points that I'll hit at the end again, designed for VR today, but some of the concepts I'm introducing here, not totally innovative. I'm sure many people have thought about them, but keep them in mind with your designs because we can begin to solve and we can begin to learn from these approaches today in VR and end up at least learning lessons, iterating, giving away, but then retaining certain elements that will make their way into AR and MR. The goal is to be able to have as much understanding and as much learning that we can have done on the limited time we have before we live in this environment, and to take as much as we can from VR along the way. So we're not just hitting the ground running of the first XR operating system and then dealing with whatever the conventions that a potential web designer chose. So, the transition, just quickly hit some of the points there, mentioning 2D, UI, and UX. It makes complete sense that this is the approach that's being taken today. It follows convention. It relies on decades of education in many people's perspectives, and paradigms that are totally proven out in design. Unfortunately, they're not very empathetic to what it is the human will actually experience in this domain that relies a lot more on space. It relies on time. It relies on rhythm. It relies on dexterity. Ergonomics are extremely important, and ergonomics plus web page are not usually a set of concepts that you have to mix together. So the challenge today, obviously, we are, those of us in this mindset, we're dealing with the potential for what we need to most ideally deliver at some point in the future with hardware that just simply can't let us prove this out. So not only do we have to make these compromises, but if we have these visions in mind, we've got to keep these compromises in mind if we have a specific design and be willing to hopefully archive, if not know, but keep these along knowing that generation 2, generation 3 of this hardware hypothetically will accommodate a more ideal set of designs that could crash and burn as well. But we need to make sure that the concepts that we think might work today, we don't let them die in this new approach until we've had the time to try to prove them out, to try to experience them a bit. A very tough thing in doing so, though, is that most devices now are only respective of a singular input and spatial context, a room scale-based context. So if you're designing today, you're having to do the heavy lifting, and especially for a designer, you're having to rely on your engineering team to deliver you the means of pseudo-ontological blending at this point. Like what is it in my UI and UX that needs to change in between a 2-hour session of medium in which I'm standing and then I've got to be burnt out at that point, or 3 or 4 hours in, and then I go to sit. What conventions change when you know, I'm sitting at my desk looking at my LCD monitor, and then all of a sudden I throw on my HoloLens, and then a couple of the elements on my display recognize, because I'm synced with the computer, that they need to jump off the display, pop onto my tool area on the desk. I get more space on the display. I now have a different means of interacting here. Like these, right now this is a pain. This all has to be manually handled, and this is something that I am sure is being developed, but I hope to encourage exploration into, because this automatic handling is, I feel, one of the only ways we're going to empower the designer to be more loosely coupled to the engineer to deliver this type of innovation. Because otherwise, I don't feel the designer is ever going to be able to express themselves properly in this domain. Again, we're going to cover some of the basics here, but yeah, experiential, don't puke, that sucks. Don't frighten people unless you want to. Yeah, fatigue, again, ergonomics, extremely important. This is one of the first cases where you can't rely on someone that's going to be sitting the entire time or standing the entire time or doing anything else. Like design needs to envelop the human experience finally. And you, based on analytics, based on machine learning, we're going to be able to create with ontological blending situations in which we can cater to an individual that we know their average session duration for standing is going to be 15 or 20 minutes. It's not going to be 3 hours. You know, when we hit that point and we understand that retention can last longer, if we can gauge when it is that we can induce a sitting situation, UI and UX can conform to that, well then we enter the situation where finally in XR we can extend session length because we're caring for the user at the same time. Again, something that doesn't exist today, but we really need to consider these types of things. Cross-app UX pollination, something I addressed earlier. The conventions that are being developed today, some are quite pervasive, and a few of them, a decent number of them are quite innovative, and they're doing a great job, especially in the VR domain. But don't be afraid to test those bounds. You know, if you have it within scope, if you have it within your timeline, if you have the permissions from the lead or the project manager, or on your weekends, you know, just test out new conventions. We're only here because we've crashed and burned so many times just to get something like blink locomotion, just to get something like a teleportation means. Like this is only going to mature in a direction that the designer truly has power over if we approach it in this way. Accommodation of people with disabilities is something that I personally don't hear spoken about at all for XR, and I just don't understand how those don't intersect at a certain point. And if that's a Band-Aid we put on later, I can't imagine the excuse for, it's going to be too hard to architect that right now, or we don't have the engineering budget. I can't see a position where that doesn't occur and at least extend out the duration in which individuals with certain disabilities can't participate in this world, which would be, in my opinion, quite tragic when AR and MR actually makes a large impact on society, that we have the unique situation in which we can begin to prepare for that. It doesn't mean we code all these conventions in advance, but any engineer, any innovative designer already can imagine what it is that an individual in these situations might roughly call for. So if we do nothing more than leave API hooks open, or to-dos and code comments, or designs that we keep priority as soon as the hardware lots, like these, I don't think it's just if we leave these people in the dust where we're all going. When you go in for your next cell phone and instead you're subsidized to get your glasses, there's no reason they shouldn't be able to be there with us.
Yes, thank you.
So input, interaction, UX design, again, anyone who's in the industry right now, this is pretty standard fare, but I won't hit everything on the list. These are all fairly basic things. Let me pick out key ones here. I think I've already hit quite a few of these. So interesting one there. So respect space limitations. This is one of the first times where instead of the resolution of the screen or the physical size of the screen and understanding that you'll have to move your mouse left to right or up to back or whatever set of choices n number of times to be able to accomplish a set of actions, or the most common action on a website or inside a mobile app or a desktop app, like space is a thing. So not concerning yourself with using the chaperone to automatically adjust UI and adjust UX patterns to be able to accommodate puts you in a position where you're forcing your user to do something as hilarious as I've seen, like, you know, punch a hole in the wall or something inadvertently. You know, like this is one of the first times where we can not only bore, but we can harm our users if we don't keep these things in mind. Haptic design language is being spoken about in a very basic form, but I really don't think we've explored this very much. I think that clothing interlaced with haptics is going to open this up into a brand new area where we'll be able to have track-based haptics and pattern-based haptics that you'll be able to either have entrained one way or entrained both way and be able to overlay actions or input coming back both ways on that. But I think we need to make this a priority for exploration, at least in defining a set of conventions on a per app, per experience basis. Because if we don't explore where this can work best, the OSs are going to own this, and who knows how much time they'll invest in owning that. They might serve us a default haptic language for a tap, a hold, a drag, a notification, et cetera, that a designer will have played little to no role in. So it's important that we play that role in there too. Multi-user input is just the biggest can of worms. Best of luck with that. Scene fusion intermixed with editor VR gives you an example of interaction in this environment, but even in editor VR, we've gone out of our way to block out certain situations so that you don't have two people fighting over a single piece of UI, and in the case where something like that could happen, we mostly just disallowed. But this is something that in an AR, MR future, we're not going to be able to ignore. So we've got to understand that if I have a UI element that needs to be visible and appears in front of me, and there's someone in front of me as well, do I take it, and then if someone else wants it, do they grab it and does a ghost come out? I mean, do I own it and they can't have it? That doesn't really cater to the other user. These are things that we haven't had to care as much about, and again, a very important thing in my opinion. Social differences and gestures, I touched on that with the plane analogy earlier, but this is an area I don't hear spoken about at all, and I don't know how this won't impact, number one, culture and society, but the app sales at the very least, OS saturation in an XR environment. The assumptions that one can make in how something as simple as a vocal tone or a gesture with hands, what this means in one culture versus what this means in the same culture, go to another place. Well, does this mean open over there, or does this mean close over there? Oh, well, I've landed over here. All of a sudden, when I do this, I've basically signaled to the room that I mean the inverse there. So we've got to identify, and I don't know how we're going to do this, but that's about the exploration. We've got to identify this common means of being able to do this blending and identify to other users when these changes have occurred, and to the individual in the glasses. So this is very, very early territory, but this is what we're all going to be living in. I would hope that we all want harmony in this situation. We all want to be able to communicate, achieve whatever actions that we want to achieve, not unintentionally offend other people, and this is a language that doesn't exist, and we need to begin defining this. Affordances, buttons, please, hardware manufacturers. Can we have a few? Can we have expert model with some more buttons? We don't need to resort to gestures unless we want to, but we have to. So pretty please, that'd be great. Another thing that I don't hear spoken about as well is the exploitation of unused UX scenarios, of bad UX scenarios. So let's take, for example, in the 2D world, the hot corner of your screen. What the hell am I using the hot corner of my screen for? Oh, well, it activates my virtual desktop with my multiple desktops. Okay, well, I never would have used the top corner of my screen in that case. That's an interesting exploit. It opens up a whole new area of delivery for the user in what it is that they need to achieve, but it was an area that was not being used at all. So let's take, for example, a situation in, say, VR today. So in a situation like editor VR, we can have, say, a situation where you're performing the wrong action when hands are too close. Let's say, hypothetically, you're trying to rotate yourself. So you've done a grip and you're rotating the camera. When the hands come this close together, then when you move even slightly, you're flipping your view 180. Puking's fun, or not. So instead, in that case, when they're that close, that serves no purpose, well, why don't we switch to a refinement mode, a refined mode? So as the hands come within close proximity, since that serves no purpose there, well, then that just becomes like a turret. You begin rotating there, because outside of that condition, no one wants to ride the magical rotating roller coaster that makes you throw up. So let's, given the limitations of the hardware right now, let's explore these conventions where there isn't a normal human everyday use for these situations, and we can sneak in and we can begin to define conventions. A lot of what I'm covering in this talk is about where designers can jump in and begin defining these new conventions, have that cross-app pollination that will occur, and hopefully make your way in a more established form into the XROSs at some point. But this is the point right now where the experimental designer helps to shape those XROS languages. It's very important that the designer be the one in charge of that. 23, yeah. Shout out to Sean. So we don't want this, unless you do. And that's, it's nice abstract art, but not the best way to convey a certain UX pattern, and definitely not the best way to deal with information architecture, obviously. So a couple points here, I'll pick out the big ones. Everyone assumes voice is the panacea. Voice is not a replacement. Voice is a nice complement. The day that you have to get on the subway or a bus or an airplane and everyone around you is saying, open to the left, move to the right, I have to think that you're going to want to potentially fall back on other conventions, and I have to think also there'll be regulations in which you can't do certain things at certain times. So voice is a good complement. Let's not totally depend on that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, depth, inclusion, and reachability, going back to ergonomics for pace and timing, extremely important. Consider these things. But pace and timing, a different thing now. This is one of the first UX situations where rhythm, where cadence of motion begins to play a very important role. Your UX patterns, your solving mechanisms for allowing a user to achieve the actions they want to be able to live in this environment, which we will at some point, this depends on space. This depends on rhythm. This depends on how it is you solve a complex chain of 7 or 8 actions in which you don't want the user to have to walk over to the other side of the room to perform that. How do you deliver that as a designer? You know, if you know that that's a high incidence situation where n number of steps will occur in between here and there, let's start designing and figuring out a pattern that can solve that. Because this having something pop up, having to close, open, point, click, all these things, there's no way for anyone here that's done a 4 or 5 hour medium session or a quill session or tilt brush props, but there's no way you haven't run into that, in my opinion. I don't know a single artist that hasn't, and the artists are the ones that are falling on the sword right now for the users of the future. So the designers that don't heed the input from these artists are just not taking advantage of the situation right now, and we need them to be the ones that are defining this language. And maybe this is, you know, ballet. Maybe there's some choreography that's taken into account. Maybe there's Tai Chi that's taken into account. But this motion, this language of how it is I express, this set of UX solving patterns, this matters now. Pretty common sense. All the visibility essence there, all the elements there. It covers the architectural design that I mentioned there for information. Pretty standard stuff. We won't hit that. Most designers will have that covered. And this is going to be a quick little run through of the, we call spatial pattern in EditorVR. So again, not a panacea, but a means of exploring how it is we can approach the solving of different user actions through a completely different, well, mildly different UX pattern at this point. So we're coming from the land of 2D. We're seeing 2D content shoehorned into VR. We're having the whole point click, hands have to do everything, everything has to be pointer based, and this language is defined, and this language should exist. This is the language that should be there and that we're going to get initially high initial retention rates up with. But that being said, this doesn't need to be the language that we end up carrying people into the future with. And this sure as heck, in my opinion, is not going to be the language that we end up living in an AR, MR future. There's no way 200,000 people walking down the street are going to be doing this. That would be entertaining, but I feel strongly that there'll be at least one specific XROS company that's developing something that will never allow that to happen. But again, it's important that not just them, that the rest of us designers also play that role in shaping that. So, what is EVR? EditorVR is Unity's metaverse creation tool right now. If you haven't used Unity 3D, I'm standing in the office right now, but that being said for anyone else, you should probably download it. Go to GitHub, download EditorVR. Eventually, hypothetically, it'll be actually shipped as one of the packages in the package manager, but try it out and start to explore the approaches we're taking. You know, we're testing boundaries, we're building a foundation for something that might come after we're done with this stage of our work. But this is the foundation. You can jump in. You can offer us input. You can contribute code. You can contribute design ideas. You can solicit GitHub issues if you want. But get involved. Help us iterate. Help us learn from you, and tell us, inform us as well. This is a feedback process. Again, this is that culmination, that build up to that point to where we live in this environment. So you get the choice, you get the option to inform us as to where we might want to go as well, and we might want to build those tools out for you as well. So that being said, the spatial pattern. Now, this is a very young pattern. I have an image. I don't have too much more of that. Unfortunately, that was cut from my talk, the original version of this talk, and it's not in this one.
Wait,
but, what's up?
Do another talk.
I only have this one right now. That's all I could get. I was up till 2:30 last night. So quickly hitting this, without going into a ton of detail here, the goal here is to be able to allow an individual to express any chain of actions without needing to solve for a room scale based input pattern. So again, it's not, you could be sitting, you could be standing, you can be looking at your hand, you can be looking at the roof, you can be doing it with one hand, you could be doing it with two hands. In Editor VR, we go out of our way to solve UX patterns in more than one way anyway, but this pattern is being designed for anyway. The intent of delivering to the user a singular means of a single button press in an ideal situation. Worst case scenario, one more press, and the execution of any number of chains of actions. This could be dragging of a slider, this could be executing a menu command, this could be doing a multitude of things. For example, on this one right here, I would like to have shown you a video demo here, but yeah, simple press of the button, drag through space, defines a vector. As you drag along the vector, you're highlighting different items, and then when you've gotten the one you want, you just release your button, and then you've selected it. There's no need for a second hand, there's no need to point, there's no need to scroll through, there's no need to look at your hand. I mean, the next layer of this, which will come with the potentially come with the inclusion of the feature of the alternate UI based on gaze focus, is that the hand then, doesn't matter where it is. In local space, the hand hits a button, the hand drags, and wherever the gaze is, the initial spawn of the UI comes up there, and then you're cycling through your options, you let go, and you select. Now, of course, this pattern extends there and makes it a very, very convenient means of executing these actions, but it goes, the intention is to allow for EEG entrained actions. The intention is to allow for tonally entrained actions. I mean, the core of the structure of what allows the change of value to occur only relies on an entrained action. That entrained action could be a vector in space. That entrained action could be a single tone spoken through by a user's voice. That entrained action could be the concept of red as you think of moving right or left in your mind. Like that, the system is roughly being developed with that core so that it can be extended that way. Adaptive UI. Responsive UI in XR is going to be extremely important. It's not being addressed too much today, but we really need to find the best possible means of being able to solve this. So responsive UI. XR responsive UI and adaptive UI is going to be extremely important. This hasn't been solved at all today. The examples that exist on any AR and MR hardware are cute, but we really need to mature how it is that we approach this. There's, as I mentioned earlier, the understanding of how context will be dynamic needs to become ingrained in the core of these OSs, in the core of these applications. So the designer is given complete freedom over how it is that the context change of a specific UI element, a specific action that will solve for the user to accomplish a specific thing they're looking for, can change in between having the VR headset on and having some touches or vibes in your hand, taking the headset off, and then that content transitions onto the screen. You picked up your HoloLens, you put on your HoloLens, and then the applicable content pops back up here again onto maybe your tool area on your desk. But this, we need to develop, and we need to allow designers and researchers to develop this fluid language of how it is that this content is able to switch from context to context, and what it is, how it is that on the engineering and the design side as well, we can begin to develop an ontology based on this, a set of taxonomies that define what it is that applies to an AR situation, what it is that applies to a VR situation, and allow a language in the background to be able to automatically conform some of that content wherever possible so that it can transition to say this content can only go from a 2D domain on the screen to a VR domain, whereas this content over here can go from a 2D domain into an MR domain and then can go into a VR domain and back. So these, I think we need to explore what conventions can work throughout, what conventions just can't or are a complete waste of time in AR and MR, VR for that matter as well, and how it is that we can start to cycle these throughout. In a few months or a year or sometime in the magical future, I will have some videos of this and we will demo more of this. So yes, the AR-MR transition, maturing the ontology, and the thing that wins me no friends in the design community when I put it up there, but the embracing of machine learning. It's not about replacing you. It's about bettering you. It's about enhancing you. Yeah, cybernetics. So yeah, in the maturation of the ontology here, we've got, we need inside-out tracking to become established. Like we're in such a crippled state right now that there's really no way that we can convey the message that we want to convey, that we can, oh, other direction, sorry. Fire truck. That we're not even really allowed to convey the UX patterns that we would like to at this point. Again, crippled by hardware, but it's getting much better. This is my pie in the sky. I'm very interested. I think I know 4 other people that I've ever interacted with or met online that are interested in EEG input, but thanks to Elon Musk, this might change here. Neuralink, you know, will hopefully make this a bit more of a thought in the forefront of designers' minds, but it's I've found it difficult to describe how elegant the entraining of a concept after the EEG system has been trained and the addition of a secondary concept, which could include motion, which would be a change of normalized value, which could be a change in imagined volume, a change in anything that could account for a value change in your mind. It could just be my mind and the few people that I've interacted with as designers that feel this is a factor we should at least begin to imagine and consider. This isn't today, this isn't tomorrow, but this is in the future here. Like this, that will be a thing. We do need to consider that. That's going to be a very special language because that's one of the languages that will allow us pure transparency. That will give us the glasses and allow for the exact same scenario we see outside today with people waving their arms and people just, you know, appreciating the dirty streets or whatever it is that they're doing without the need to have everyone look like they're, you know, badly breakdancing in front of everyone else. Like this, I think that's going to be one of the freeing elements there. That, of course, 200,000 people speaking next to each other about how they want to open and reply to email. Yeah, cross-virtuality devices, when, I say when, if, but when that eventually hits, I think that's going to be a game changer. We're all conscious of the state of VR today. I know where I would like it to be, but with cross-virtuality devices, you'll have a pair of AR/MR glasses, and using either the opaque LCD or the opaque glass technology, you'll be able to go in and out of XR situations. So in a situation where you're in the boardroom, you'll be in AR mode, it goes transparent. When you want to be immersed in a content creation tool, then pixels become opaque, you go into VR land. It's going to be a really awesome scenario, but that's another reason that we need to create that adaptive UI, that responsive XR design language. Due to time, I'm going to cut this a little short here. So yeah, aesthetics important. Don't kill people with spatially aware design that's badly done. But the most important thing are the XR operating systems. The core of the reason that I'm here to give this talk, the core of the reason that I spent time crafting this is to try to encourage individuals to be conscious of what's going to happen in a multi-context domain in the operating systems that will claim ownership to our day-to-day existence. I want designers to be there. Designers need to be there, and designers who are willing to experiment and learn. We'll go quickly through this, but yeah, UX curation can be a thing. It's not today, but it can be. Like we can actually craft these player models. We can train these player models against our data. We can set up, and ideally, I'll hit this in the next frame, we can set up testing suites, you know, unit tests for UX. We can have a fail occur when a success rate through n number of trained player models of different demographics, different, you know, AI-based demographics, when they fail through. Like this is an amazing thing in my opinion for design. This allows the designer to become decoupled from the researcher. This allows the researcher to prove out a design without the need of of the designer. This will allow people to shine in the way that they can truly shine. But we need to give researchers and designers the UI to be able to accomplish this. Yeah, it's going to drive engineers crazy. Get them pizza, sushi, beer, coffee. Tell them crunch won't exist. Try not to get them to kill you after they find out that they're going to get denied because they had a UX fail on a commit, or a merge. But it's going to be a big thing. The person, the team, the company that lands this, it's going to be amazing for a designer or a researcher to sit down with an intelligently laid out UI and prove out as many design patterns as you want with success rates pulled back from any of the testing models based on any age demographic, persuasion of any sort for any type of person. Like we've just, this advent of machine and deep learning has never been here. We have it now. Someone's going to pull this off. Adaptive UX, ontological blending, ode to Kubrick there. Yeah, love the AI. So security design architecture, this is one of the frames that was also cut out of my talk. I did manage to recover this one though, the original version of this talk. Designers need to be here. Like this is a language. This is not a technology in the background that's just going to be able to exist unless we're willing to cede all personal privacy and all ability to, or most ability to filter and audit and control what it is that we have permissions over in this environment. The designer needs to be there. The designer needs to be creating a language that will allow users to be able to say and define passively, hopefully, transparently, what it is they want to participate in, whom it is they want to consent certain things to. Like this, if this is a catch-all and there isn't a designer in between the operating system and the content, then we stand to basically say, you've clicked OK on the installation of this operating system, that's your permission, like akin to certain web browsers today. The designer is the one, I believe, that can jump in and craft out this language that is as least intrusive as possible to the individuals, to the users, and still allows them to retain their permissions. Without going into too much more, that gets to, I believe that designers are probably the only individuals in the production pipeline that will be able to prove out a UI and UX that can get us to the democratization, possibly, of personal data. So these items I list here, IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, pardon the name, but OpenAI tied to the blockchain, these are about securing permissions that are your permissions. You'll own your permissions. Your permissions that you've defined through 10 years of existence, the nuances of, there's this one sound and I never really like to do a certain thing when I'm hearing this at this volume. That permission, that condition that exists, this is one of the only ways this will be portable in a cross-operating system environment. I personally feel that the designer is the only one that's going to be able to make this accessible enough to the user and drive adoption at an early enough time before that point comes where we have a chance to be able to have an uptake of this in the operating systems. Without going into too much more, it's extremely important when our memories, when our interaction, when our culture, when our expression is completely shaped in this environment and we live in this environment completely. But the plus side is, it's metaverse time, when this takes over with the operating systems, specifically, of course, the XR/OSs. So we finally will, at some point, get some form of heavy lifting done by the operating systems with XR specifically in mind. This includes the ontological blending. This is context breach handling in between different apps that are fighting for precedence over another. Like a lot of these things we're going to have to tackle with an engineer and experiment and iterate and fail and then try again. Like these are things they will take over, but this is also the point of the talk in that this needs to be the designer. This doesn't need to be the engineer making these choices. It's not that an engineer can't provide valid input, but it needs to be the individual that lives in this environment that knows the user, that can project and empathize with the user, that can craft how it is that these specific things that will be handled by such an operating system will be driven by the user in this case. This will be our lives. We will live in this. This is the most empowering moment, in my opinion, for designers whom I personally feel don't get the respect in the pipeline that they should. This is the moment where we need to listen to them, and we need to begin to listen to them more and allow them to craft this path. Because when you can't escape this, when you will live in this, when this will be everything that it is, that from the point you put those on to the next 50, 10, 200 years of your life, at whatever point, this is all we'll know. And if we give them the freedom and we give them the support that they need, then we won't have to worry about this. This will be done transparently. This will be done with care. Aesthetics will be taken into mind. And we can live a normal day-to-day life without these intrusions, potentially, thanks to their involvement. This is extremely important. We'll skip the multi-user stuff. But the cross-product app UX, the conventions you develop today, the pollination it gets with other apps, and the way that it will potentially make its way back into an XROS at some point means, again, the designers of today are going to make better conventions that we will live in, that we will express, that we will share. There's a lot of onus and a lot of responsibility on the designers today to be able to keep this in mind if they care about this. This is inevitable. We will get here. But you get to be the one that makes the successful app that, hey, in VR Lamb sold 5,000 copies, but you've established this new convention that's so much better and so much more established and so much more caring for the user in accomplishing that action thanks to your innovation. And we don't have to carry this convention for 25 years after we get our first pair of glasses because you've chosen to contribute. You've chosen to participate. Time-independent user interaction. I've read a little bit on this. It's an intriguing concept, but I won't touch too much. But the concept of being able to basically leave XR voice messages and have machine learning act as an intermediary, time independent in between interactions between the two. Amazing concept. A little bit out of scope here. Complex user stories, though. That's another thing where machine learning will empower designers. A designer that's allowed to have n number of patterns proven out and handled automatically and ontologically blended amidst, rather, this is going to allow either a single designer to cover more ground than they ever could as an individual, or this will allow a team of designers that are specifically acing each one of their areas to be able to have those areas smoothly blended amidst as they're going through an XR scenario, which goes from AR back to VR, back to reality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's extremely important that in my opinion, design does not negate the value and not something that will violate or harm their career, but the value that machine learning is going to provide here. Like designers become the rulers of the land if these tools are given to them, if they fight for these tools. Yes.
The time-independent interaction, can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah. So let's think about a VR voicemail. So I've recorded myself. You've chosen to play it at a certain point, but there's a point in interaction in this VR voicemail where I might solicit a response. And it's just a question, and then I move on in my recording. So I've said, hey, how was dinner last night? And then I move on to another point. I'm just having myself recorded here. When you pick this up, machine learning doesn't even have to try to be able to, at that point, wait for your interaction or have me, believably idle. You respond. So whenever it is in 10 years or 10 minutes that I end up picking that up, that's filled into the conversation. Like a time-independent approach is being handled in certain ways right now in physics, but I strongly feel, and some of the very cool approaches I've read online that other people are considering anyway, that this is a special thing that the designer, again, going back, same thing, the designer needs to play that role there. Because engineers.
So are you describing like interacting with a proxy AI of somebody, like generating an AI out of somebody's personality that is going to have a conversation in their stead?
And a proxy AI that fills in between the gaps that would continue that interaction independent of time.
This is actually makes me think of like right now we have voice detection and it's in the spaces in the grammar recording. Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you can pass back this independent interaction between n number of people that might go on for however long, but it doesn't, there's no linear time into how this thing actually occurs.
May I ask you to
Yes.
repeat that? I didn't get it.
So think about adding a complex dimension to conversation. It's an argand diagram with, you have I, basically. So if I've sent you a voicemail, I started, hey Dio, how's it going? Hey, how'd your presentation go? And then I move on to, well, anyway, yeah, I just got back from vacation, things are great. Well, at the point where I say, how's my presentation go, and you get it, it's child's play for an AI to take over. And then at that point, put me into an idle state, and you go, oh, well, it was pretty good, da-da-da-da-da. It was, I had this response. It was wonderful. It knows where my next change of interaction occurs. And then when I come back in, then I know exactly how you responded to that moment. This seems a bit arcane. I understand that. This is one of the things that I fought with removing from the slide, but this is another thing I can't understand how this will work out well without the designer doing the driving of the user experience in this. And what it will free us from in a linear interaction form, I think will be extremely valuable, even if you take the human interaction out of it, even if you go, like John said, to total AI. So, but then that also, I only left it in because that ties into complex user stories. A complex user story, like if a user has to end up doing 15 actions to get the camera to point up to the roof, well then there's no reason, if we can infer that a certain set of actions are going to occur, well that we don't just solve against that and say that, oh, we can eliminate 7 of those actions. You can still accomplish the middle event that you needed to, and the camera can still point up there. Like that, there's a little bit of hands-off that's going to need to occur from designers, but that hands-offness, if you will be bolstered by the AI. Now, I have a strong opinion that the designers will own this domain. And the individuals who can take themselves out of a single mindset with AI as basically machine and deep learning as an assistant, engineering won't be a thing, in my opinion, at all at that point. And the designer will just be able to craft reality. I mean, it will be what we actually live in. It will be how, over time, I can only interact with you. I've been trained. This has come through the eyes and the mind of a designer, and it's the only way that I can express a certain thing to you because I've done it 2,500 times, and it's the only way that works well with the system. So if anyone needs to go, they can. We hit the point, but yeah, no problem, man. If anyone wants to hang out, I'll hit the next few remaining frames here. So XR/UX as a lifestyle is what I've been building up to, obviously. This is where we're all wearing the glasses. We all live in this. Everyone in this room this is passé at this point. But aesthetics are extremely important in this environment. I work backwards from, and I certainly hope that the individuals in control of this are working in developing this technology, are working backwards from how it is that we'll be able to live, to interact, to participate in this environment, and have it be aesthetically pleasing. Have it have potentially at least neutral, if not positive, shaping of cultural interaction and individual interaction. And that's where the designers are going to come in. Because if we let anyone other than the designers into this role, and I'm not saying people aren't cross-disciplined, but I don't know how we get to a point to where we aren't living in a situation where aesthetics are not even a factor, composition, color, motion, sound, all these things. Just, I would hate to see them lose their role. And this point of this talk is to encourage the opposite there. Unconscious metaphors and storytelling action. This just goes back to slightly the cultural gestures, the individual interaction, like how it is that we understand what the open hands versus the closed hands means in a certain context, how it is that we can handle these changes in between different situations. Effortless and natural action goes back to my mention of Tai Chi, ballet, choreography. If you're in a situation where you want to express yourself and we're not in an EEG environment, well then we should make it graceful. There's no reason someone shouldn't be able to get off of the subway and do a little move with their hands and they've just confirmed an email. We can create that. We can design that for them. Which hits all those down there. Timing, rhythm, choreography. I didn't hit too much on timing earlier, but the timing and the rhythm also is very important too. There's a cadence to speech. There's a cadence to someone's gait in their walk. These things are expressed in individuals. So this is another opportunity for designers to piggyback, to build upon that, and use the motion of an individual and the timing, the cadence of that motion to be able to convey UX patterns in a brand new way as well. Reiterate again. Spatial requirements, ergonomics. The chain of actions was the complex solving that I mentioned earlier there, and being able to eliminate steps and not have the user perform n number of steps to accomplish the same action. Transparent interaction goes back to the thing I've been hitting over and over throughout the talk here, which is we're going to live in here. Do you want to see advertisements and pop-ups, and do you want the room to be overlaid with a random color that you find distasteful for no apparent reason? Like this is the role that we need to play as designers in setting up the structure that gets established, that the XROSs adapt, hopefully, so that we can all be wearing glasses right now and none of us will know we have glasses on. It should be there when we want it. It shouldn't be there when we don't want it. Yes, so I'm with Unity Labs. We rock. Labs.unity.com. You should check us out. We're awesome. So, thank you.
This is coming from an engineer.
Yeah.
So I struggle when I hear designers talking about intuitive interfaces. Because I don't know the definition and how do you measure, because I see a lot, oh, I did this and it's very intuitive. Well, I'm left-handed, that's totally unintuitive to me.
Okay.
So what does that mean? How do you define it? How do you measure?
Well, I think you need to. So the challenge of understanding, why something would be intuitive, or at least purported to be intuitive design-wise. The mention of what if it's right-handed versus left-handed in design, I'm with you there. And that's one of the approaches we're taking in at our VR, in that if you're coming from the left hand, well, content positions itself differently on the right hand. If you're coming from the right hand, positions itself differently on the left hand. There are underlying, there's a foundation to the ontology that exists today in current design and in ergonomics. We don't want to have to achieve more motion to accomplish the same action. So if there's a button can be placed here, and I'm using my right hand to perform the action, well, there's no reason the button should be there instead of there. Like in drilling down and patterns of interaction, the complex solving I mentioned, which is now linear solving to a majority degree day to day, would be, for example, it's part of the point of the spatial system, is that you'll trigger the initial action and you'll be most easily driven to the next action and the next action and the next action. So the goal is to have the most minimal amount of input occur to get to step 12. And there is a philosophy behind that. The philosophy is, how long is my arm? That philosophy is, what is the dexterity? How many times in a day do I want to do this? 20,000 times. The other is, the language of what room am I in? What people am I surrounded with? Do I want to do that in this case? Another one is, color and composition. Analogous or complementary colors. How do they play into the language I'm defining in this, which pairs with haptics? So, if we know that contextually in, say, Western culture, green is go. I'm not saying we do this, but like you can use the subconscious responses and triggers, the reaction to qualia that we all have, to piggyback on that. We can exploit that. We exploit the tendencies that the human mind has to their external environment to lead them to what it is we believe we're intending to design for them, or at least they should go to in certain cases. So there's definitely there are multiple levels and layers to the language that leads someone to accomplishing an action or participating in some form of environment or situation that we can facilitate in a better way, in a more cohesive and a more inviting way that provides, which in my opinion is key unless you're torturing the user, the most conducive means of expressing oneself in that environment. Like if a user has to fight against the system that they're interacting with, then I think we've already lost. We'll always fight against it, but if we're not trying to solve for that, then I think it all comes down to caring for the user.
Yeah. I like that. So the recommendation is define your language. Don't just call it, I'm doing intuitive interactions.
Yeah, I mean, intuitive, like I said, intuitive is multiple levels. Intuitive is, why would you make a confirm button red in Western culture?
I think what you're getting at is like intuitive generally is shorthand for something you're used to, right? So I know what you're saying, like intuitive can mean different things to different people.
But what you're used to is so individual.
But
that's right. That's like every time I hear that, oh, this is excellent because people are used to it. No, you are used to it. Yeah.
Well, this is where the ontological blending comes in.
Right, that was getting at the machine learning applied to different design patterns.
Yeah.
Be able to kind of personalize some of that.
Once we identify the taxonomies that we use for classification of this area, and we have not an ontology, but multiple ontologies, you've got the deal ontology of how deal interacts. With that blending layer, with that API layer that basically can handle for that transition, then we can know what it is we want someone to accomplish, but we can know what it is basically we're served from the user through intent, because your system will have defined what it is that Dio finds inviting, purple instead of red, or the opposite. The goal is not. I've been interacting with enough designers, and I feel strongly myself like there are enough that don't think in a linear form. There's no reason to make something a regimented set of steps when we know where we want to get to. There have been enough design discussions and enough designs have been involved with where the individual, they're totally fine with accommodating different changes. It's just we haven't given them the tools. We need to give them the tools because I mean, no offense to me, again, engineering labs, formally by title at this point, but I mean, like engineering, we should count our days. Like we should be empowering the designers and giving them the tools that they have to be able to craft these environments. Because we don't need to play a role. They need to build this reality.
I think I'm a little confused about, I mean, you talk about like engineering is going to be phased out because it can be generated through AI, essentially, right? But
to a degree.
But design is still important. I mean, it seems that if you're saying engineering can be obsoleted by just applying machine learning to it, then I think the same could be said for design and, you know, optimize for aesthetics, optimize for intuitiveness, whatever that means in this context, et cetera. Like it seems like, and you touched on this earlier, applying machine learning to
Absolutely agree.
so I'm a little confused about how,
I'll go back to
how
this.
those two intersect.
I'll go back to this frame right here.
Right.
If that occurred,
Pre-AGI, there's still a...
pre-AGI, I think I'll use the example of a visual scripting language right now. Where they started in the 90s and where they are today, we've built so many layers upon what it is that an engineer would need to accomplish. At the compiler level, it's so much more optimized than anything but the most focused engineer on making something that low-level optimized could even code themselves in these cases, because the compilers are written that intelligently around some of these visual languages that if machine learning can infer intent of an architecture pattern and it can solve through iterative steps, especially through a deep learning network, I don't see how it can't not solve it. I mean, it's solving more complex problems today in a lesser extent. When we broaden it up and we define the ontology, we define the training data as C++, as C#. And more importantly, when I think will be the dangerous one, is when these models are trained up with design patterns. When they know what an entity system, when they know what decorator is, when they know what factory is, well then all they're doing, all their training data are the only patterns that most of us can only remember 3/4 of, if we're lucky, you know, on automatic recall.
And I guess that to that point, engineering design patterns is so discrete that it seems, at least intuitively, it sounds like it's easier to program that. While creativity, being a designer, is such a fluid, organic. So programming, like automating creativity, seems harder because we haven't figured out those processes. So that's
harder,
but this is what my feeling.
Yeah, I'm being hyperbolic, but I like if you aced engineering, if you aced C++ in 1987, you're still good today. If you aced UX and design in 1987, you're irrelevant to a great degree today. And once we can ace that, the issue with me is.
Personal attacking me out of nowhere.
I've had plenty of 1987.
So I will say, I understand what you're saying, and I understand your stance, but I'll respectfully challenge that.
Oh, please do, yes.
Because like Doug Engelbart was not a designer. You know, Bill Buxton was not a designer. These two gentlemen are responsible for most of the experiments we've lived with.
I'm with you. And again, like I said, I'm being hyperbolic. That's all. I'm more.
Everyone's a designer and everything's design. I think the
Exactly.
best architecture in the world is reflective of the great user experience, is reflective of great architecture. So,
Exactly. No, I'm with you.
We do have AI writing music right now.
Yeah.
That exists. So that can be another, like, devil's advocate. Maybe creativity in general, we actually will be able to crack it up.
Yeah, I don't think it's about replacing. I think it's about empowering. It's like a designer today gets Sketch, they get Photoshop, they get tools. All I see this as is another tool. But I do pragmatically see that there's a very linear process to engineering that is solvable once it's solved once. I mean, it is solvable, and it will be iterated, and it will be bettered probably to a degree to where a human is, could never compete unless they're thinking on the assembly level. But and I wasn't See, the problem when I say designer is what am I saying? Because there are designers that never do visuals. There are designers that never do motion. There are designers that are really researchers but call themselves designers. There are designers that do all of it. The problem is the interaction of what you say a designer is. And that's the tough part about trying to went 15 minutes over, but I mean, that's the tough part about hitting this, in that I want to encourage synergy. I want this can become a different thing. This individual set of disciplines where someone serves a role, totally valid, I think, in this environment. But the individual who feels as a designer that they're always having to challenge research, and they're always having to say, oh, engineering says there's no time. Like the designer that's just not allowed to execute their vision right now due to so many limitations, I don't see how this doesn't empower them and free them. And that it allows that designer to say that I don't need to just be relegated to here. I can actually prove something out independent of other areas. And this, whomever it is that chooses to develop this first, I think we'll have the happiest designers in the world working with them and creating with them. Because it will eliminate so many steps and so many means of stifling what it is that a designer attempts to express and is stopped at so many levels on right now that I just don't understand how it won't. I can't believe that it won't change everything for the designers and honestly for all of us. And I think for the better. And I think the earlier they jump in, the sooner, as I mentioned, with everything going to OpenAI and the other areas I mentioned with security and everything I mentioned, they need to be in the forefront. And a place like Unity is wonderful because there's a lot of input taken from designers. There's a lot of credence given to a designer's decision in an engineering pipeline here. Very, very different from anything I've seen before. But this should be level one. The second that a designer is able to craft out a concept just by themselves, prove it out, run it through the training models, and then they've committed it because the design patterns from engineering have been practiced, trained in, the code is done, it's compiled, and then the build goes out. Like that's going to be the most amazing thing in the world, and that's a thing that will happen.
Particularly UX, I do feel like UX
is the one area where it can happen.
Way too much on engineering.
Yeah, UX engineering. I mean, I'm in the horrible place of like being like an engineer and an artist and designer and all these things like at the same time. But like, yeah, and the engineer side of me is driven crazy by the other side. But engineers they're crippling the designer's chances to properly express themselves, not by their own intent, because we have no choice because of the limitations of what it is we can express. But this, to get to the future where we live in this, I want to be in the reality in which the designers have tried to explore this. Because it's only going to take one to do this and then open source it. Or close source it and make a crap ton of profit off of it as well. There's that angle. But someone's got to do it. Because the first one that does it is going to create an environment where I can't see as a designer that you'd ever want to go back from that. Why would you ever want to jump back into an area where three of your limbs are gone, and you're trying to express the same dance routine? That will be here, so I want as much involvement. Yes, that would be. It could be the hop routine, Yeah, but anyway, pardon the rant. But questions or?
Yeah, not necessarily questions, just more like some yes and things to add on.
Cool.
One is that I love that you brought up the whole thing about a fluid ontology and like adaptive, independent of, or respective of all sorts of cultures and perspectives. But the key there is that right now, when we're developing all this machine learning technology and like getting all these data sets, we have to be careful about the assumptions we make now, because those are going to influence the ontologies that come in the future. Like, for example, I don't know, like facial recognition systems that look at a face and then they like just gender it automatically based on what the appearance is.
Oh, they do it now, yeah.
Made. Yeah, like just this morning, like at the, what was it, AR talk, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, assumptions like that,
mm-hmm.
It's really important that right now we keep in mind all of this.
Oh yeah, I think if I might, I think I'm getting your. Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
I think going back to what I said to Dio, like that's where I'm trying to advocate for a shim layer. That's where that blending and that shim layer resides, because that's the same thing where I said, like, if red is go to you, or purple is go, like that's not my business. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I conveyed an action, an operating system conveyed an action, and you were able to handle that response in a way that catered to your perspective on there. You can choose to participate in the common way that would be, the common in quotes, of course, it's indoctrinated by whomever is designating it. But you can choose to participate in that way if you want to, but if you don't, this allows for an individual to, I understand the caveats of what I'm saying. This allows for nested mini cultures, of course, and this can lead to very hyperbolic situations in which, you have bubbles of culture that maybe are extremely, I won't go into a pessimistic area, but it also allows for, if we establish the convention, if someone pushes for the convention and having these layers, and we could, I feel, piggyback this upon the security layer, if we could do this, then you create the environment where we're beyond time. So like in a transhuman or futurist perspective, I think that we will get there. Things like, I really hope I'm not being recorded, but things like taste, race, gender, age, height, all these things are gone. Like they're not a factor if we can ace this domain. Thank you so much.
The other comment that I wanted to make is, I am so glad that you brought up the thing about people with disabilities and keeping that in mind. A key part of that is making sure that those people who will benefit from these technologies, that they are involved
Oh, absolutely,
in the
absolutely.
development process
That
as soon as possible.
It hurts me that we're not informing ourselves at all.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know how, like, the number of people that came up to me after, whatever form you want to consider this as a talk, but the number of people that came up like, I've never heard anyone mention disabilities in relation to VR. It's always VR for them. And I go, I know, that's the point of the talk. When you're, and a couple of them were VR developers, like when you're in the room, it's your job to advocate that we have this voice. That's, if you care, and you're purporting that you care, then we need to involve them because we're, as I said earlier, we're designing this scenario where all of a sudden you walk in to upgrade your phone and then, we're all living in this world. And then we go, shucks, we totally made a bunch of assumptions by two people that were in this one department in engineering that were going to accommodate everything from this one group. And they were informed by a bunch of things they might have read. But did they go through a decade of user testing? Did they go, did they get feedback? I don't.
It's not disability, but I've already been through plenty of VR experiences that are bad for me because I'm so short.
There you go. Yeah. And that's where I was mentioning like the adaptive context. Like this is a situation where like if we do it today, we encourage the OSs to uptake the lessons that we've learned into what it is that they put forward. Because it's, we have to be pragmatic about the bottlenecks that are there in VR today. Like it's great for people like us. It's great for certain prosumers, but when we're living in it, like same thing I'm going to say again, but yeah, we've got to interject concepts. We've got to iterate. We've got to do that because if they have the implementers of these OSs will have a limited number of resources. They will have a limited amount of time, and they will probably do hypothetically the commercially best that they can. But there's no reason where if we don't innovate and we share and we establish patterns that make it, how amazing would it be to have, carte blanche patterns or EVR patterns make it into certain apps? Like, then a successful app forces the hand of an OS developer to go, I guess that's a pattern we're taking on. This is great. Yeah. And everyone wins there. And that's why I feel this needs to go outside of labs. I feel that designers need to participate because there's some 16-year-old kid with the most amazing idea that we'll all be so thankful for in 5 or 6 years that if they know that we want their help and we care right now and we appreciate their early involvement, they'll throw it up on their GitHub, they'll throw an Apache license on that, and then we all get that.
In machine learning, since I know they're as good as their training data, so that's not an area where we can already advocate and push. Like, okay, did you train that on dark people? Did you train that?
Well, that's actually why.
Right, that's one thing that we can start doing.
That's why I advocate OpenAI. Are you familiar with OpenAI tied to the blockchain? So yeah, OpenAI tied to the blockchain is specifically set up in a way where, where training data is totally anonymous. Training models are totally anonymous. You create a model, a contract, code. you submit it to the system, to the blockchain. It trains against whomever wants to participate. The model never is aware of the data beyond the training session. The individual created the model has no access to the training data. The training data holder has no access to the model. You get the model back, and you can basically, it's not just my hope, it's the express goal of OpenAI tied to the blockchain, is to have the largest anonymized set of training data, which could be yours, it could be mine. Like, people can participate. You can say, I want to be part of this, and no one will ever know who I am. No one will ever know anything but how I contribute to this. I can never violate your model. It's all your intellectual property, but you get the largest sample base on the planet potentially, you know? And you get paid for your data too, which is great. Like, it monetizes your offer of your data. So no one ever has to know you, and you get crypto coins. Yeah, could be worse.
Just to make sure I'm hearing this right and understanding this right, what you're talking about is the benefits of having completely anonymous, completely like global data and input without the worry of like infringing on people's privacy.
Yes, that's the express model of it, and it's already up and running in a basic form, and they're pushing forward with it big time. And
downloading the data because they know,
well,
they're using it for ads.
And the problem the problem is with data models right now, and what this solves is they can still cherry pick. Think about what happens when you have an anonymized database of individual data, and you basically say you can't be certified unless your model trained against this. Then all of a sudden they can't say, oh, this one specific group of people that I only train against, that I say my model works against, oh, it completely fails against the general populace model. And by training against their data, I had to give you all a little bit of crypto because that was what I paid to have the model trained against. So you're private, you're paid, and to get certified against that model to actually look legit in the same way that like Linux works right now, they have to train against it. In fact, anyone that trains against anything outside of that will basically say you're basically not peer reviewed to a degree. I mean, how great is that scenario? Yeah, that with IPFS as well for decentralized web storage, then all of a sudden we can store permissions, we can store personal data, all of this information can be totally anonymized, and we can establish standards that the industry can't ignore. I mean, that's, honestly, I can't believe those even exist. And the fact that they're becoming very well established in certain AI fields and universities like that, it's pretty much dream come true for anyone that was even considering like that. I mean, that training model or the data and the training model situation with OpenAI and the blockchain, it's an amazing concept. No? Any more questions? Yes, I breathe.
Yeah. I'm going to have to ask you later about that whole time thing and have a concrete example of that, because I'm still not sure I'm entirely grokking it.
Just think about it the way that LA Noir works. You know, you make instead of a branching predetermined choice, well, you just introduce something into there that has to be solved against. So in the same way that you ask Siri, you know, who are you? And then it gives you some, you know, whatever answer, but it's inferring it from a database. That database would be inferred from the training data that is your interaction in there. So you can either sub in a proxy response, which would be something the AI assumes, or it could find a point in the conversation that gives you an answer to that, and then it solves to serve you that.
Okay, I think what I was confused about is I was thinking either one of those things will work better. Like either there is an AI that is answering for you, which sounds kind of creepy, I would not want that, or it's just entirely.
No, it'd be a blend. It would be up to you to choose. So yeah, I mean, which technically with Google Allo exists today, just not in VR. Yeah, it's a little.
Which is like AI.
Oh, it'll have a whole conversation in
What was that?
Google Allo. It just talks for me, and because of the amount of interaction I've done on it, like I'll just look at it like, that's weird. I actually would have said those last 8 things.
But it's not your voice, it's selecting the answers, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know, that's creepy.
Well, you know what's great though, like
I use that more than in this stuff.
And I find myself
Allo, ALLO.
it's like, that's what I would
Like,
say.
Great.
yeah, like I think it's for like a hello in Australian.
You get it in your emails as well now?
Yes.
Like, that's pretty
Oh, ALLO.
Yeah, sorry. It's pretty amazing to like be like lying in bed and like just look at my phone like, oh yeah, I would have said that. Oh, they're gonna be there? Oh, cool. Well, I don't think I'll be. Oh, 2 o'clock. They know my calendar. Oh, I'm going back to sleep. Like, well, that was insane.
Chatting with my boyfriend, I would tell you, sweetie, but I mean, really,
it's the most amazing thing when it's just like, do I need to exist? I don't know. Like you put me in cryostasis. Yeah.
Sorry, I just feel it for me.